On the channel today, we are going to be talking about the newest release from Recess YoYos. This is the Firecracker. Let's get into it. When Tyler reached out to me to review the Firecracker, and he kind of explained that it's a modern, responsive yo-yo, I was like, yes, absolutely yes. There's a bunch of different colorways, and I'll have a picture right here to kind of show you those. But this one in particular is the coffin edition with these engravings. Check these out. And if you are old like I am, you might know the nostalgia this is from a little bit, and it is inspired by Black Cat fireworks. So again, I'll have a picture here to kind of show you the inspiration there. Certainly very nostalgic in that that design there. So Black Bat, really rad, and his own sort of take on it. Definitely has the coffin style to it as well. But let's get into the yo-yo itself before we throw it. Now, it is meant to be responsive. It did come with an unresponsive bearing as well. So it's C-size bearing, came with a center track, I believe it is. But yeah, you can throw that in there and it would be an unresponsive yo-yo. So if you don't want to throw it that way, for the purpose of this review, I am not going to throw it unresponsive. I've been really liking it as a responsive yo-yo. Again, if you want to go ahead and throw an unresponsive bearing in there, you certainly can. Now, the bearing that came in it, I think this is smart. I've actually dealt with one of these bearings before from Spiral. I believe I got one of these bearings for the first time from Spiral. And this is a rubber gasket around there. So instead of, like, you know, if you're familiar with bearings, right? It has that little metal little C-ring there that you can pop out, and then you can get the shields out to clean your bearing, that kind of stuff, right? So in place of that, we have here a rubber ring that is, so it's lubed up, and then that kind of blocks it. So basically this is, you don't have to clean this yo-yo, you don't have to add more lube to it in the future, that kind of thing. I guess you could if you really want to, if you want it a little bit more responsive, but it's been greased up really well, and the response has been great. It's a flat bearing. Now, what I like about this setup, sometimes on responsive yo-yos that are C-size bearing, they kind of just swap it out for like a half spec. And I like this setup better than like a half spec bearing or half spec C-size bearing, because you can get more string wraps. I feel like you have a little more control, and it just has a little longer spin times in general. I feel like sometimes it snags up with just a much more narrow gap. So it keeps the gap just as wide as you'd have on a unresponsive yo-yo, but you can get more wraps and that kind of thing. So I don't know. I just feel like it's just playability is so much better. This is designed to be responsive, so it's a little on the slim side of things. It's not super slim line. I like that. It's kind of a nice in between, but it certainly has a slimmer profile overall. But it doesn't have like a crazy high wall, right? So it does kind of drift away from there a little bit. So it's a little bit of a competitive kind of gap, a little bit more of a performance kind of gap there. So you can still kind of get some string wraps. It's not going to snag up on you really like heavily, right? It's got some chunkier rims as well, so it's going to get some decent spin times. Not like uber rim weighted. Of course, if it was much wider, you'd feel that. But stability wise, it's going to be there. Longer spin times, it's going to be there. But as a responsive yo-yo, it's not going to get like the longest tricks ever anyways. I don't think that's its goal. This is meant to be really a fun yo-yo. This is not going to be a yo-yo that you probably compete with. Maybe you can. I don't know. You compete with anything, right? But yeah, this is really meant to be just kind of fun in that fact. And I think it's exactly what it's done. But I really do like the design. It's really nice and clean. It's got a little bit, again, it kind of has that feel of a high wall, but not super high wall, because it kind of pulls away from there a little bit. It has that little ledge there, so it kind of pulls, has a little less string drag. So yeah, overall, it's going to play really well, but it's a nice balance. So whenever we use the phrase like modern responsive, you could just say responsive, right? But it's modern in its design, right? That's really where it's modern. But the responsive part is just the bearing, right? Of course. So let's actually go play it. Again, we're going to play it responsive. So let's tilt the camera a little bit more and get into the play of it. As far as the string here, I believe it did come with like some, I think it's kitty string or something like that, some bulk string. I am using my Prestige string, so it's a thicker string. I've had no problem with it as far as kind of snagging up a little bit. Sometimes for responsive yo-yos, a thicker string is not great, but because the gap is wider, it's kind of a normal size gap, because the full spec C-size bearing I think a thicker string would be just fine. In fact, I don't find a problem with it. Now, I did shorten it a little bit. Usually for responsive play, I shorten it a little bit. More so probably with yo-yos that I'm going to play responsive that are going to be like more like fixed axle kind of tricks, you know, stalls and that kind of stuff. But I still went ahead and shortened the string a little bit more. So I took a couple inches off of it. So as I said, you know, it's not going to be like the longest spinning yo-yo in general, just because it is responsive. So it's going to be fun for just kind of like, I don't know, challenge you to kind of get longer tricks maybe, perhaps, right? But really more of like throwing some of those just kind of short little banger tricks. It's super comfortable on a catch. It's nice and flat there on the rims there, so it's really comfortable. It definitely does feel that like kind of slim line, but it's really not super thin. So really comfortable in the hand, right? You're going to be able to get those string wraps, like I said, that you wouldn't have with a half spec bearing. So more layers, that kind of stuff. It's just going to be a lot more forgiving for that. The play on the string has a little bit of a heavier feel. Nothing super heavy, but heavy enough that it's going to get some spin times. It definitely just doesn't feel like a brick or anything like that, but it's not a lighter playing yo-yo. As far as responsive, like modern responsive or like fixed axle kind of tricks, but you know, it's not going to be as forgiving maybe as something with a really high wall, right? Sometimes it slips a little bit if you're not careful, right? Just like that. So you have to be kind of intentional about it a little bit more, but it's certainly capable of doing those kind of stall type of tricks. But where I think this yo-yo really kind of excels is these kind of tricks, right? Not the typical, you know, fixed axle modern kind of responsive kind of tricks, rather. Again, those work, but this yo-yo I think is designed for a little bit more of that kind of play. I've been having a lot of fun with this yo-yo. You like modern responsive yo-yos, you're certainly going to dig this one. You're going to want to pick it up. It's a no-brainer. One other thing I love about modern responsive yo-yo is it kind of just reminds you that yo-yo is a toy. Yo-yo is meant to be fun. It's not always meant to kind of just perform. And maybe I'm speaking more from somebody who doesn't really compete. And I get that. If that's your life, that's the way you approach yo-yo, I get it. But it is a toy, and I think it's just this is a fun one. This is also a really good candidate for an EDC yo-yo, something you can just throw in a bag. It's going to be nice in the pocket too, because it is slimmer, and it's, you know, I think a responsive yo-yo is really approachable for people. Now, if you're also somebody who teaches, like Tyler does, you know, this is maybe a good yo-yo to kind of bring with you, right? Because an unresponsive yo-yo is not really approachable, right? To somebody who knows nothing about yo-yo, that the first thing you gotta teach them is a bind. I'll have a link in the description where you can find out all the things about Recess YoYos and where you can buy the Firecracker. Yeah, that's my review of the Firecracker from Recess YoYos. If you like this kind of content and all that, make sure you like, subscribe, and all the things you're supposed to do. I'll see you in the next one. Later.